Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Founders and Leaders series from Insight Platforms. My name is Mike, and this is where I host conversations with the people who are building, leading, or have built and led significant businesses in our category. And that will become clear what that leads to in a moment, because I'm joined today by Tovah Paglaro, and delighted that you've carved out time to speak with us, Tovah. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So Tovah is a serial founder with multiple exits under her belt. Is now a consultant and advisor to other businesses, helping to spread some of that wisdom. And we're hoping to glean some of those learnings today for free without having to pay a consultant. This will be wonderful for all of us. Tovah, tell us a little bit about the businesses that you've founded and led, and where they came from and how they evolved before we clarify where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the story goes all the way back to the early 20s, the first things, and my love has always been at the intersection of story and strategy. That's where my heart is happiest. It's where my work really takes off. And the beginning of my career, that actually started in media. So I was a producer and a TV exec, really telling stories and thinking about how those stories impacted the things that we believe as societies and narratives and our realities. And the more time I spent in that, the more I started to think, oh, there's more we could do with this if we started to really think about it a little bit more intentionally. And so that led me into campaign spaces for a little while, thinking about systems, social systems theory, and sort of theories of change, campaign systems. And the more time I spent there, the more time I thought, oh, this could be a lot better if we had better research. And by better research, I meant deeper human understanding. If we really understood people, not just in a tick the box kind of way, which is really where we were when I entered that space, where qual and quant were really differentiated products and spaces, and where really the vast majority of the research that I was seeing and that most organizations were working with was pretty basic quant. And so what I was really interested at that point was, how do we get a much deeper human understanding that allows us to drive the kinds of organizational change, social change, behavior change that I think are most important. And so that led then to the research space. And there's been lots that I've done in that space, but I think we'll probably focus our conversation primarily on the last two organizations that I built and exited. The first was called Avalanche Insights. And we pioneered qual at scale. It's an exciting thing now, but we did it as a tech-enabled agency before we really had the advances in AI that we currently have. The ability to listen at scale and make choices based on people's responses in their own words and understanding that language. That company we launched in 2017, primarily in the civic and political space, mostly in North America, but we grew it to about $5 million and about 60 people. And then it was acquired, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But what we did was retain the core tech, that core concept of being able to make sense of language at scale. And that led to launching Fathom AI, which is the company that was launched in 2022, 23, somewhere in there, and that was just acquired by QuestionPro. So they now have the best text analytics, in case anybody's wondering where you should go for that. It's over there. And that was more of a SaaS platform, more of a pure tech play, the ability to make sense of language at scale across all of the different use cases in the research space.
So it's quite a journey for a 2-minute potted history. So got the kind of the video and the storytelling, and then you've got the sort of, I guess you'd call it kind of political context around that, research and insights to power more of that decision making, and then into technology, each of which have got a sort of, there's a golden thread that comes through them, isn't there?
There really is. Yeah. It's always driven by story and strategy and sort of iteration of scale in that pursuit.
Yeah. I'm really interested, as someone who has media experience, you're a TV producer, all of that kind of content, you've got to understand the audiences, like you say, the narrative, the storytelling. What lessons specifically did you take from that into the research and insights world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are probably three that sit in really different categories. The first is that there is no industry that is better at trusting people to do their jobs than the TV and film industry. And so a lot of how I learned to build organizations and build companies actually comes from that. When you're on set, everybody knows exactly what they're supposed to do in service of a vision, and is empowered and trusted to do their job very well. And if they don't do their job very well, the consequences are pretty clear. That's the way it works in that industry. And it's both sides of that coin. We also work in that industry in something that has been embedded in everything I've built since then in terms of culture, which is ambitious sprints and actual rest. And so we push hard to achieve really awesome things, and then you take a break. And so there's some lessons around culture and how to build organizations that are capable of achieving really big things that I learned being in production, in film production. So that's one category of lesson. The second category of lesson is that obviously that entire industry is built on the power of story, both for entertainment purposes, which we need that right now. It's okay to have things that are just for the sake of a good laugh and a bit of a thrill and to bring people together around shared story. I was still coming up at a time when people sat around their televisions together and watched the same content and then could chat about it at a coffee shop, and that it created shared understanding, shared narrative, shared culture across differences. Maybe you had some really big differences in other spaces, but you had an empathetic understanding of story together, and it collected us and so I really continue to believe in the power of that. I'm always curious about like, how do we continue to build shared stories, shared understanding, empathy across differences. We don't always have to be quite so political, even in the civ-tech and political space. And so that has definitely carried forward. And then the third category there was the need for better research. We did a lot of audience research, obviously, and that field has catapulted forward. I've been really lucky to work with teams at Paramount and PBS and Netflix in my research capacity, and I know the kinds of excellent research those teams are doing. Now, at the time that I was working with the national broadcasters, the depth of research that we could achieve in terms of audience research was pretty limited. And so I always felt like we were doing a little bit of the thing that happens in research where you're sitting around the table and decisions are made because my great aunt who lives in Idaho has this belief, and my nephew, who definitely knows all college kids' point of view, has this belief. There was some of that was happening in the industry at that time, more anecdotal. And so, yeah, the need for better research to drive better outcomes.
Three great learnings off the top of your head. I am particularly drawn to the comment you made about a shared understanding or shared experience. And I think a lot of people are using research now to try and plug the gaps where culture's fragmented, people's news sources are fragmented, and they're trying to understand more about how do people connect or common ground that they can understand. What else do you see as some of the bigger trends? So your third category of learnings from the media industry, obviously need better research. In the time since you worked in media, a huge amount of innovation. You alluded to some of what you've done. What are some of the big trends that you've seen across the research and insight space that you think are powerful?
Yeah. So I think that, like anything in the world right now, is moving really fast. The trends that I'm seeing right this second are pretty different than how I would have answered that question like 18 months ago. And we are still in that moment of transition. So I will caveat this, but these are the observations of today. And 12 months from now, if somebody's watching this, they might feel really dated, because we are definitely in a moment of transition, of massive transition. I think one of the trends that I'm the most excited about right now is the breakdown of silos within research, whether that is quant versus qual, which we just talked about at the beginning. It seems to me that more and more organizations and more research practitioners are just rejecting that as dichotomous and thinking of research as a holistic outcome that requires some element of both of those. And the balance might be different on different projects, but that those aren't binary and they're not dichotomous. So that's definitely like sort of trend number one. But I also see that same breakdown across like siloed organizations. We're really seeing a shift away from like market research teams and consumer insights teams and audience research teams and user behavior teams and, I don't know, macro trend research teams, and towards a more holistic view of like, what are the things that we need to understand as an organization in order to make the best decisions, and how are we optimizing those decisions? How are we drawing across these teams? How are we making sure that they talk together? Sometimes we're merging them. Sometimes we're turning into repositories of information. All sorts of different ways that people are leaning into that need, that challenge, that opportunity. But that's the second trend that I see, is the breakdown of those silos. And then related to that is definitely the democratization of insight across organizations. And we can talk about different ways that's playing out across the industry, but certainly within enterprise teams, across pretty much every sector that I'm seeing, whether we're talking about like CPG teams or media teams that we work with a lot, or really some of the transportation and logistics teams that we have been working with. Across all of those teams, the desire and now also the technological ability to be able to do more with all of the insights by putting them together and making them, I'm trying to not to use too much jargon because it's actually different in every organization, but like making them available in consumable ways to people who aren't researchers, while maintaining some element of control so that the researchers make sure people aren't doing dumb things with things and drawing conclusions that make no sense just because they have availability to data, which can happen.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. We see these trends playing out to a greater or lesser extent in different verticals, different businesses, like you mentioned. But listening to you, I was struck by your first learning in media, which is everyone's trusted to get on with their specialist expertise until they're not, if they mess up. But I guess one of the reasons for that is because in a media production, in a TV production, you've got an awful lot of very specialist skills coming together at different stages in the process. So you don't have deep teams with pyramid structures of lots of people doing a similar thing. The research trends you just described, in some ways, are the opposite of that. So deconstructing silos, people becoming more multi-functional to be able to do UX research, market research, whatever it is, and democratization, making things easier. You'd expect me to say this, but I guess the technology is probably the driver behind a lot of that. Was that your take as well?
I'll say yes, and maybe there is no world and no response that would be able to subjugate the impact that AI is having across the sector on everything and everybody. And that is definitely feeding into those things. But I think that the desire for those things is a very human desire and a very revenue-driven desire. We get better outcomes when we don't have siloed information across organizations. That's not a new problem. Everybody's been working on that problem for, 25 years, maybe a different amount of time. Maybe somebody else will have a different answer, but a long time that we're feeling the downsides, like specialization came out of industrial production, came out of we get efficiencies by having people be very good at their particular pieces. And for the last little while, we've all been wrestling with, okay, but it also has costs. We're losing abilities around collaboration. New innovations aren't happening as much or as quickly as they could be. People's work life isn't as joyful as it could be. All of those things come from that. And so, yes, AI is enabling a lot of the things that we just talked about. Also, the desire for those things is a very human desire. It's a desire to be able to do better work faster and better, that unlocks more revenue for the organization to be able to do more collaborative work and dip your toes into different parts of the organization and get more joy from your work. All of those things are feeding into that trend as well. And so, AI, but also human.
Yeah. And like you say, commercial pressures that actually reduce team sizes. So you're forced to make those changes, but much bigger than just shiny toys.
Right. I think a really fun AI produced video recently that was like, oh, I want to be able to do more with less. And I think we're all seeing that across the board right now, that there is external pressure or top-down pressure to be able to do more with less. And also there's an intrinsic desire for us to be able to do that and for it to be joyful, right? To be able to have joy in doing it. And I think they captured that really well.
Great. Okay, here's to more joy. So this brings us back to the part of your story, which is Avalanche to Fathom, building technology, but with its roots in your understanding of the actual workflow and the need for the customer. Can you just talk through what did that journey look like specifically, going from the services first to a technology first?
Totally.
What lessons did you learn? And also the implications for other organizations in the industry. I'm using that term as a kind of catch-all because we've got such a spread of consultants, agencies, tech firms. So what might be some of those implications?
Okay, I'll start off by saying our timing, we had a wonderful journey and lots of success in many ways. Also, our timing could have been more hilariously off with both organizations. So we built Avalanche as a tech-enabled consultancy at a time when there was still a lot of desire for there to be one thing or the other. VCs, funders, in particular, were really like, you can't have services and also be like a tech company. Right now, that's changed. Everybody wants a good tech-enabled service company at the intersection of AI and human. at the time that we were doing that, and I think I name that because that trend has changed, but some of the challenges of building that organization remain. And some of the challenges of building that organization, the biggest challenges that I see have to do with different incentive structures and different ways of working for those two teams. And that's very manageable at a certain size. You get to a certain size and you can have a tech team that has all of the systems and structures and culture that they need to be an excellent tech team. And you can have a services team that has all of the systems and structures and incentives that they need to be an excellent services team. And if you do a really good job about thinking about the systems of incentivization between the two and collaboration, then they can be feeding into each other and meeting each other's needs toward a shared vision. And that is beautiful and wonderful. And sometimes we got that very right, and sometimes we got it very wrong. And the reason for that is because growing that way is really tricky. When you are 20 people and trying to grow to 150 people, when you're $1 million in revenue and trying to grow to 10 million in revenue, you have to make trade-offs. Are you investing in the tech? Are you investing in the services? If the services is making money and then it's all getting invested back in the tech instead of in bonuses, how are folks feeling about that? To bring a live example from a lesson we had in terms of lessons learned. And so it ends up meaning that unless you're very careful, you're optimizing two things. And anybody that's ever built anything knows that if you're trying to optimize two things instead of one thing, then you aren't optimizing any of them as well as you could be. And that tension can be really challenging to balance. I also think it's a really fun challenge and one that I'm excited more organizations are building into, because certainly building Avalanche was one of the most fulfilling things that I've ever done. When that team was working, when we had those systems working well, the kinds of deliverables that we could deliver to clients, the kinds of insights that we could unlock for people was absolutely fucking mind-blowing. It was super, super awesome. And that was really rewarding for everybody on our team, for our clients, for the revenue that followed because of that. Putting human and tech together is the best of everything. And so I'm excited to see more organizations leaning into that. I think there is more openness, and I know that there is more openness in the investment community right now to lean into that model. Yeah, I'm excited to see where that's going. Part of our decision to spin out Fathom was that at the time that we were facing some decisions around how to grow the company, that wasn't the case. And there was a lot of pressure to be one thing or the other from an investment point of view in particular. And so we leaned into, let's be the tech. It isn't entirely driven, I should say. It's not entirely driven by that. We're really interested in scale. Like, how scalable can we make the distribution of this technology, the capacity that we are unlocking, the ability to make sense of language at scale? And a service company is forever going to be somewhat limited by the people who can deliver that. And so we decided to spin out that core tech. We ended up actually rebuilding pretty much everything from scratch, as you do when you start to do user research and find out what other researchers want it to be and what it needs to be, a full-scale SaaS platform. And that was also a really good learning, that the thing that you built internally doesn't actually translate beautifully into external. And so we ended up rebuilding absolutely everything to build a platform that, again, delivered a ton of value and was very scalable. And the kinds of insights that people were able to get from it was fabulous. And we got really positive feedback, and it grew in a really fabulous direction as well.
It's mild PTSD hearing you talking about that fight between the services business model and culture and the technology one, because it's one that I had for about 6 years straight before finally losing it. And Insight platforms probably wouldn't exist if I hadn't lost that fight.
I didn't know that.
It was something that was hard to convince the mothership in Vancouver, actually, just down the road from where you are, when you're running a region in Europe that actually needs a much more nuanced blend of professional services and technology. And the dichotomy, like you say, that black and white thing, you've got to be one thing or the other. It's so refreshing to see that no longer being part of investors' requirements, because the things, you do have to get the mix right, you have to get the management right, the culture, all of those things for sure. But yeah, it's a challenge, but also there's a fabulous opportunity if you get that right, because that's what the buyers need to some extent.
Yeah. And it's easier than ever to get it right, because again, coming back to that thing that we were talking about, sort of the blend of human and tech and AI in terms of like where trends are going, it's just easier than ever to build custom needs for particular clients and to be that tech-enabled consultancy in a way that is really scalable right now.
Yeah. Do you think this potentially leads to different types of business organization? You've got Sam Altman talking about $1 billion solopreneur powered by
Yeah.
Advanced AI. You've got, like you say, this kind of blend of human and technology. Do you think we'll see different types of businesses emerge in the insight space?
Yes, and I'm going to go with a yes and again. I have also been with Sal Mountain just talking about that. I've also been in a lot of conversations with VCs. Everybody's question right now is like, how quickly can you get to 100 million with less than 10 people? It is the question when I'm advising early stage companies that I'm asking them, do you need to raise? Why do you need to raise now? What can you do as a team of one or two? The answer is a little different for everybody, depending on what skills you bring in and what market you're in and all of those sort of questions, what product it is that you're building, but it's the core question to ask right now. I'm also not seeing that change in a really stark way in the market research industry right now. What I'm actually seeing here is that we have a lot of innovation in the kinds of companies and in who is doing what. We have a reshuffle more than a complete and utter overhaul. There's organizations like Outset and Listen that didn't exist 4 years ago that have raised a lot of money and are using that money to hire people. And they're hiring not just senior people, they're also hiring junior people. And some of the things that I think we're all holding our breath around, oh my God, how the Jesus are we going to have good researchers if it's all senior level and there's no training coming up? And the same conversations are happening in professional services across the board where folks are using AI. That we're not really seeing that play out right this second in our industry. We're actually seeing smart entrepreneurs who are building new products and new categories and who are hiring into the organizations and using that capital to do that in ways that I think are really pro-social, which is how I think about that. I think where we're seeing more of that sort of pullback and more of the AI first, AI forward small team is in two places. So one is in the consultancies. I certainly have the experience over the last little bit. I've started consulting and advising, and if I was I'm intentionally being very light. I'm taking this year to just only work on things I'm really excited about. Nonetheless, I would have needed to hire a couple of juniors to support on some things a couple of years ago, and I certainly don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing it in that sort of space. And I'm certainly in the teams when at Fathom, about half of our customer base were agencies and the other half were enterprise teams. And we saw different changes happening. The agencies were dropping juniors and being able to move towards full-scale delivery with a smaller, more concentrated team. And you see the contraction, certainly the lack of hiring, like the agency hiring has gone pretty darn flat. The enterprise teams, the brand teams, I've seen more of what we were talking about around consolidation. So more people are doing more. And they're doing that in an AI forward and an AI enabled way as enterprises are getting their AI policies and all of their sort of practices sitting underneath of them. The SaaS platforms, honestly, less. That people are still having to hire and people are still building, and what they're building is a little different in order to meet those needs. But yeah, teams still seem to be hiring and seem to be building in ways that I actually find really exciting for the market research industry and for the space.
It's been quite refreshing to see companies whose identity is entirely about tech bringing in what you'd say is some pretty advanced full service skills, capabilities for consulting and insights, and seeing how so many agencies are building product or developing offers that are powered by technology in a way that, like you say, wouldn't have been that possible before.
Yeah.
What I haven't seen much of yet, and there are maybe 3 or 4 exceptions that come to mind, is kind of ground up business model reinventions for the space. So an entirely different type of business that doesn't have either of those previous paradigms of being just a tech product or just a pyramid-based agency research consultancy.
Yeah.
And there's relatively few. I guess the business model reinvention often takes time. There's a lag with the technology innovations and the appetite of the buyers.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I think you're absolutely right. And I think I see a lot of experimentation to figure out where reinvention should go, but not, and pivots actually within organizations. I see teams that used to have only a sort of subscription-based or a service-based starting to move into things like tokenization and other models. I see a lot of experimentation. I don't see anybody like diving in with 2 feet. I don't think anyone's quite sure what they should dive into 2 feet with. But I definitely think the industry is going to have to respond to that much broader trend across the board that consumers are tired of paying for SaaS products that lock them in. We all experience that. I don't know about you, but I certainly now, like, you get a thing and it's like the first thing you do is look at the cancellation terms and whether you're going to be locked into something you don't want to be locked into, or whether you feel like you're being treated as a respected human being. And so I think we're going to have to respond to that as an industry, just like every other industry, because we are all tired of having had that experience of being locked into something for 2.5 years, going in circles, trying to get out of it. Not saying that players in the industry have been behaving that way, but really broadly, the SaaS experience has been that some of the time. And so I think we're seeing a lot more experimentation in terms of how closely we can bring a model that is still like a pure tech play to a structure that feels for the user, for the consumer, like dollar to value, as opposed to dollar no matter what.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but I agree. People are becoming much more kicking the tires a bit harder, I think, to understand what are they actually getting for and are they going to be locked into something?
As well, we all should, because we all work really hard for our money and we don't need to be locked into things that don't work for us. But I do think that then it becomes incumbent on the organization to be really thoughtful. And I think that organizations that get this right are going to be rewarded for it. That is because it is actually what people want. And we see it in the data and we see it in behavior, that organizations that get that right are really going to be rewarded with that trust and with the dollars that follow.
Okay. I've got two more questions about them and the recent experience. Or to be honest, no, the first one is more across the businesses you've built broadly. And then I'd like to understand a bit about the exit process and how that looked. But and I don't know whether I'll propose you for this or not, but are there any mistakes, any things you wish you'd done differently, anything you'd advise other people to avoid that you experienced in growing those businesses that you've led?
Like a million? A million mistakes. Hopefully many of them we course corrected along the way. I think one of the most common, some of them are like my own personal, one of the things that happens as a founder is you learn more about yourself than you can in almost any other working relationship in terms of how you show up when things are good and how you show up when things are bad. And all of those things roll out to the organization because that's the way that it works when you are as in that position. And so some of those things end up being like really unique to the individual. And then some of them are universal. One of the ones that is universal is that when you are building in a new sector or when you are building for the first time, you probably don't know what you're doing, which means you're going to make some big mistakes. And those big mistakes are going to have human costs. When you make a big mistake as the founder, the people that pay most are whoever's on the other side of that mistake. And those are almost always people. One for me, for example, was when we started building the platform components, the really techie components of Avalanche. I didn't actually know what product was. I thought I knew what product was, but now that I know what product is, I didn't know what product was. And so when we hired our first product manager, a wonderful fellow named Shaku, who did his very best to help us do a good job, we did not set that poor human up for success. And the person who bears the brunt of that is him, because I didn't know how to set him up for success. I didn't know what kinds of information he needed. I didn't know what kinds of systems and structures he needed. I didn't know what the right archetype of product manager was to hire for an organization at our stage building the way that we were building. And it was a really frustrating experience for him. And his frustration was my learning because I wasn't prepared enough and I didn't know what I didn't know. So I think that is one of and when I talk to other founders, the experience of hiring badly early on is pretty universal. It looks like different things for different people, but you make a bad hire. And I think one of the things that I incorporated from that learning was that is inevitable. It is going to happen. And the thing that I think you land on that sets apart whether that's okay or not is how you treat people through that. Do you take responsibility for the fact that you didn't know how to hire for this role well? Do you support the person in finding their next role and find good recommendations? Do you give them good compensation on the way out? Do you fire them as fast as possible so that they aren't being tortured in a role that they aren't suited for or set up for success in, and let them get on with what's next? Because nobody is set up for success when that happens. So that was a big learning and really hard. I care more about the people in my companies, I think, than anybody else. At the end of the day, all of the work that I do, whether it's mapping narrative, is about people and human connection and empathy. And one of my biggest reflections now, having been in leadership across a whole bunch of different organizations for 20 years, is that as a younger person, I thought I would measure success by accolades and money and wins. And I measure success by people, by what they are doing in the world, by how we've set them up for success, by what they've gone on to do next. When I think about how I feel, it's about like, how did we manage that challenge? Did we meet that person? Did we support their growth? And so for me, that lesson was really impactful. And it's one that I've seen across the founding world, that at some point you need to learn that you're going to hire the wrong person sometimes. And how you manage that is one of the most important things you can do as an organization. It also builds trust across the organization because everybody watches that happen. And do you, as a leader, show up with accountability? Do you do what the rest of the team needs you to do, which is usually to let that person go and hire the right person and set them up for success? But do you do that in a way that respects every person that's involved and takes responsibility for the fact that you just didn't know what you were doing quite yet?
That's really, and thanks for being candid, I think, about this specific example, because it's something that I recognize. And I think a lot of people in agencies who've tried to build tech capability or different types of commercial capability will recognize that. I've seen it a lot, particularly with sales. Sales is always a very difficult profile to
Totally.
get wrong.
Yep.
And it can succeed or fail within the first week based on those interactions with the rest of the team, let alone success in the market. But I think setting people up for success, knowing how to make the most of a salesperson and giving them the tools and the processes and the respect they need, I think is a big part of why they can often fail. So
totally. And the systems and the systems and structures, I talk a lot about systems and structures, but the systems and structures that enable founder-led sales are really different than the systems and structures that set your first sales hire or your first sales team up for success. Again, you probably don't know that until you experience the pain of it, but they're really different things. I also wish in all of that, like we had such good in both of those companies and in what I did before that, really good investors who also served as advisors. We didn't really ever outsource like advisors quite as much as honestly now I would if I was building in a new sector for the first time. Because I think it would have helped us to have less skin on our knees that, again, impacted other people as we were building. If somebody had been like, the way you set up sales is fabulous for you and absolutely going to kill your first sales hire. So let's make some change before you do that.
Okay, let's come back to that in a minute as we wrap up, because obviously you're providing that now to other people. But I wanted to understand a bit about that journey that led you to QuestionPro that Fathom has now become. So can you talk a bit about the exit, what triggered it, what that process looks like, and in terms of non-specifics, learnings for other founders in this industry?
Yeah. So one of the biggest learnings for me that I had absolutely literally no idea. I did not think this was true. I didn't even know I should know this when I started building and selling companies, is that your exit is very likely, highest of percentages, to be some version of a strategic exit, assuming you can get there, and that's relational. And so going back to something that we talked about a minute ago, like it all comes down to people and relationships. And I think when I started out, you have a model from what you've seen on TV of how an exit is going to work. And it's going to be like all of this deal and you're going to go out to market and yada, yada, yada. And yep, sure, there might be some element of that. And maybe you'll IPO or maybe you'll get taken on by a firm, any of those sorts of things. But most likely, almost all of the founders who I know who have had like a reasonable exit, not a life-changing exit, but like a reasonable exit, has been some version of a strategic exit. And a strategic exit almost always depends on the buyer having already experienced the value of or witnessed the value of what it is that you are offering to the marketplace and believing that it is going to make their product, their service, their company stronger. That takes time. That is built on a ton of trust and relational. It isn't just looking at P&L. It's just not how it works. And so my biggest sort of thing that I talk to folks about is that if you want to be setting yourself up for success, yes, make sure you've got a nice clean cap table. Yes, make sure you haven't done anything silly in terms of those sorts of pieces. Yes, make sure that you've got strong revenue and good customer bases and all of those sorts of things. But if you are hyper-focused just on the business and not thinking about partnerships and channel partnerships and relationships, it's going to be much harder to move towards that strategic exit when you feel ready to move towards the strategic exit. So that's like biggest advice towards folks building.
Okay. It's not likely to be the ringing the bell on the stock exchange. It's actually far more like people-based and connection-based, you say, for the strategic.
Kind of like everything else in business, right? It's kind of like everything else in that front. It also takes a lot longer than people think it takes. When I talk to founders early on, even like myself, when you start to think, you're like, okay, we're going to have an exit, and it is as much work as your first year of building a company. There is a ton of legal paperwork and a ton of diligence and just a ton of work that needs to happen, a ton of transition work, embedding the team. And honestly, like the tech systems are often the easiest. It is not all that difficult to figure out, all right, how are we going to merge the HubSpot account? That part, we called that an MQL, we called that an SQL. Okay, cool. We can all solve that. That is the easy shit. The complicated part is that there were people or human systems, and how do we operate, and how does culture merge, and what do we believe should be North Star, and all of that. Yes, it is going into a new organization and it's going to be led by the new organization, but it also has some element of needing to be negotiated because all of those expectations also exist with the customers of whatever organization is being merged in. And so those human systems are a lot more complicated to merge. Different norms, different expectations, different ways of operating with customers. That means those customer relationships really require a ton of intention and trust and relational work while you're moving through that. And all of that can be done. And I think I'm really proud of the way the transition went with Fathom into QuestionPro. The QuestionPro team was incredibly thoughtful, in particular about some of those things around customer transitions and making sure that people had really good communication and knew what to expect, and that they were really transparent about the places where what we were pulling into QuestionPro was exactly the same and where there was going to be changes and how they would meet them and support them through that transition. Really impressed with the team, the way the team did that. That's not always the case. And that wasn't the case with the first exit that I had, where that was much bumpier, probably in part because of sort of the way that things were being built into that organization. And in part, we knew less about how to steward that. And so some of that is also my own learning.
Been through it twice, been through it once before.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so look, we've been going for a while. I don't want to keep you too much longer. You've been very generous with your time and your thoughts, but you are now taking a lot of these learnings, you're applying them in your consulting advisory. Can you just talk a little bit about what kinds of work are you doing under that umbrella? What types of businesses are you working with and advice and giving?
Yeah, awesome. So the kinds of businesses I'm working with is like beautifully spread. I am advising everything from a like design and construction company that's doing AI transformation to some work with unions to definitely a couple of folks in the industry and consumer insights and the market research and consumer insights space. I am personally just like at a heart level having so much fun being able to dip into. I really feel like after 20 years of doing this, like we really talk mostly about the last decade, but it's really been 20 years of leadership across sectors, building organizations. The one I did before this was a social entrepreneurship and enterprise hub that I came in on the founding team and grew that to 10 million before we exited. That I just have so much knowledge that I want to be like, here, have it. So many lessons learned, so much pain, and also joy in getting those lessons learned. And so I really want to be able to support other people in their journey. And I'm getting a ton of joy out of being able to do that. So it's not super industry specific. The stage, I tend to really like to work with early stage, but also transition. Most of my work is getting pulled. Obviously, unions aren't early stage, but there's a lot of transition happening around how services are being delivered and the impact of AI and AI transformation within organizations. And that's what I've been living and breathing for the last decade. So I'm having a lot of fun supporting organizations. And again, that work, I'll just say one thing. It's like, it's human work. Yes, it's technology. How are we embedding AI? But it's human work. It's dealing with everybody's fears and concerns about how we are embedding AI. And by dealing with, I mean like literally addressing them. How are we building policy and practices and norms? What does it look like in terms of education? What does behavior change look like? That's really the work of transformation, much less than being like, should it be Anthropic or OpenAI and should we build an MCP or not? So I'm really having a lot of joy in supporting organizations. It puts together the things I love most around like ethics and AI, policy and systems change, and like building tech and companies.
Sounds like you're having a lot of fun.
So much fun.
Yeah. Let's wrap up because we could keep going all day, I think, between us. But I guess those couple of companies, startups, agencies, whoever they are that you're working with in the insights and research space.
Yeah.
If there are many others that are considering starting a business in that space, is there one big piece of advice, what's the biggest at the top of the tree that you would give to someone who's considering starting out in this space? And I guess we'd call it insights, research, analytics, data, a mixture of humans and tech. What would you be saying to them?
My advice ends up being incredibly practical and tactical. The first thing is that you just need to do it. Like, you won't know until, so just jump. But the second part is that the thing you need to measure as quickly as possible is, will anybody pay for it? The biggest mistake I see is that there are lots of great ideas that people are like, yes, I absolutely want that. Will I find a line item to give you for that? Much, much less often. And so as quickly as possible, move from, are people interested in my idea, to, will people pay for my idea? We had another product manager a little later on in one of the companies named Malika, who talked a ton about viability, feasibility, and desirability. And you need to be measuring all three of those things when you are launching. Absolutely true. But you cannot conflate desirability for readiness to pay.
Yeah.
And you can't build a business if there is no readiness to pay. I think in particular related to that, I know you asked me to be quick, but I'm not a person is quick. I think in particular related to that in this particular moment is that a lot of the gains that people see are efficiency gains. And one of the things that I've had the pleasure of learning over the last 3 years is that in order for people to pay for efficiency gains, they need to be extraordinary. It's because they don't unlock new revenue the same way as some other kinds of gains. And so if what you are working on building doesn't unlock new revenue for somebody immediately, the gains in efficiency that they need to be able to capture need to be extraordinary. Think like 20x, not like 3x. And so that's something else that I really talk to people about right now. When you have an idea, oh, this is going to save people so much time, it's going to make it go a lot faster. Can you measure a lot faster? How much do they actually gain from a lot faster? Where are they going to pull it from on a P&L? Go and have those conversations. Take your researcher brain, apply it to what you're building, and go and have those conversations. Ask people those questions. And that will really help to validate whether you're on a path that might be viable, feasible, and desirable.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's really valuable. And I wasn't asking you to be quick for any other reason than respecting your time, because I know you've got early to speak with us on this morning in Vancouver. It looks nice and sunny where you are. And thank you. Thanks, Tovah. Thanks so much for talking to us, sharing those insights. There's a huge amount that we've covered here, from your story, the background, the building those businesses, your take on what's changing in the industry, and in particular that story about the kind of the exit and the learnings that people can take from that. So we really appreciate you taking the time with us. And for those of you watching or listening, there are other episodes you can catch if you haven't already in this Founders and Leaders series. There will be many more to come, as well as all the other learning that you can access, videos, articles, ebooks across the Insight Platform's website. So, Tovah Paglaro, thank you very much. And I hope you continue loving what you're doing. And I'm looking forward to seeing what else you decide to do next. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. And thanks for all that you do for all of us in this space. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tovah. See you soon. Bye-bye.